gave me such an important part in this time. Go to my people Israel and say to them to build my temple.
Ja, es ist sehr bedrückend und sehr schlimm, was Martin Luther hier formuliert.
Okay, now, when did replacement theology begin? A lot of people think it began with Constantine. That's not correct. It began much earlier. When do you think was the first people group that tried to replace Israel? Who were they? When? What year? Think about the Gospels. Who did the Jews hate? The Samaritans. The Samaritans. That's them half-breeds. Okay, so let's look at the story. In 2 Kings 17, 21 through 23, Solomon has died. Here you have Solomon's son, Jeroboam and Rehoboam. Rehoboam is Solomon's son. But God split the kingdom in two, right? Jeroboam got the north, and Rehoboam got the south. So here we are. Here's a map. And when people talk about the lost tribes, it's not really 10 lost tribes because Simeon never had a land, and they were absorbed in Judah. So in the south actually was Judah and Benjamin and Simeon and many of the Levites. But what happened when Jeroboam tore it apart, their main people were Ephraim and Manasseh. That is what was when it refers to the north. Yes, it included these other tribes that are further north, but the main thing was what is now even known as the West Bank. All right? But here, Ephraim and Manasseh were right there, and Ephraim, it says, was the head of the northern tribes, and Judah was the head of the southern tribes. They were known as Ephraim and Judah. The two sticks in Ezekiel, Ephraim and Judah. Okay, so this is what happened. And so, but listen to this. It says, they made Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, king, and Jeroboam, it says, drove Israel from following the Lord. Even the Lord gave them all these tribes. He drove them because Israel is the north, Judah is the south. And it says they made them sin a great sin because the children of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam, and they didn't depart from them, until the Lord had to remove Israel out of his sight, as he had said by all of his servants, the prophets, Isaiah and everybody. So Israel was carried away out of their own land into Assyria. But watch what happens here. In verse 24 through 26, the very next verses, So what happens, and what the governments did back then, they would take all the people that were in that land and transport them to another country, and they would take all the people from that country and transport them over to that country, so they have no sense of direction, they have no national pride. It's all a matter of that's how they would become their slaves and servants. They would just move them to other nations. And so what do we have here? In 2 Kings 17, 24 through 26, the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon and from Cutha and Abba and Hamath and Sepharvaim and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel. And they possessed Samaria. Guess who comes from Samaria? Samaritans. And they dwelt in the cities, and so it was at the very beginning of their dwelling there, they did not fear the Lord. Therefore, the Lord sent lions among them and killed them. I don't know if you knew there were lions in the Middle East back then. He didn't slay all of them, but a lot of them. And it says, wherefore, these strangers to this land spoke to the king of Assyria, saying, the nations which you've removed and placed in the cities of Samaria don't know the manner of the God of that land. Therefore, he sent lions among them and killed them because they don't know the manner of the God of the land. Back then, they always thought there was a different God for every nation. And so if they got sent to that nation, they had to make sure they served that nation's God or they'd be in trouble. So what they wanted to do was send a whole bunch of the Jewish people or Israelis back, and they would intermingle, and they would teach them. So they had Levites and different tribes come that had the priests that would show them how to serve. But guess what? They all intermarried, and that's where the Samaritans came from, was the Israelites who came back after they were taken captive and intermingled with the other countries that were now put there. Okay? And so they were considered half-breeds. And so the Jews didn't like them or respect them. And so now what happens? It says the king of Assyria commanded, saying, carry there one of the priests whom you brought from there, and let him go and dwell there, and let him teach the man of the God of the land. So one of the priests whom they had carried away from Samaria came and dwelt in Bethel and taught them how they should fear the Lord. How many of you know we should fear the Lord? But what does that mean? Well, is it good to fear the Lord? Is it ever not good to fear the Lord? Well, let's read what the Bible says. 2 Kings 17:29. It says, howbeit every nation made gods of their own and put them in the houses of the high places which the Samaritans had made, every nation in the cities wherein they dwelt. Do you realize 2 Kings 17:29, this is around 700 BC, and the Samaritans, that's what they were known. From 700 BC was the Samaritans. So listen to the next few verses in 2 Kings 17:32 through 33. It says, so they feared the Lord, and they still made to themselves the lowest of them to be priests of these high places, which sacrificed for them in the houses of the high places. They feared the Lord, but they served their own gods after the manner of the nations whom they carried away from there. They kept fearing the Lord, but they still did what they wanted to do. So it's not good just to fear the Lord as far as retribution, but still continue to do what you're doing, hoping you don't get it. In other words, we're serving God out of fear of punishment, or hope of reward, not out of love. Now, here's something that Josephus, how many heard of Josephus? Josephus lived during the time of the Messiah. He's a historian. And he wrote about the events that were happening. But guess what? He was biased. Just because you read what he says, you have to realize he was biased like everybody other reporter. How many know reporters are biased? In his book that he wrote called The Antiquities of the Jews concerning the events of Hanukkah that happened around 170 BC. He wrote about the events that happened around 170 BC. And he says this, when the Samaritans saw the Jews were under all of these sufferings of what Antiochus Epiphanes was doing, they no longer confessed that they were related to them. They always were teaching that they were the real people of God. But now that the people of God are being killed, we're not the people of God. And it says they confessed they were no longer related, nor that the temple that they had on Mount Gerizim even belonged to Almighty God. They said, we are aliens from their nation and from their customs. Let our temple here be named Jupiter Hellenius. So they believe that, on Mount Gerizim is their temple. It's a temple of God until persecution comes, and then it's no longer the temple of God. In Matthew 10, 5 and 6, Yeshua sent out the 12 after giving them instructions. You are not to travel by the roads of the heathen, and do not enter into any town belonging to the Samaritans. But rather, you're sent with the purpose of going to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Okay, that's how they started. But then in John 3:5, it says Yeshua left Judea. In other words, he told them not to do it, especially on their own. But I think that's almost the same reason I tell Christians not to witness to Jews, because they're completely ignorant on how to win them. I don't want Christians to witness to Jews because they teach replacement theology. Do you remember how Joseph's brothers didn't recognize him? Why? He looked and acted Egyptian. Why do the Jews don't recognize Jesus? Because how we're presenting him. The Jews now, he hates Torah. He only likes Greek. He hates the biblical holidays. He gave up on the Sabbath. Why don't you believe in him? That's why I think he said, don't go to the Samaritans. Because they were going to go with a total judgmental attitude, no mercy, beat them over the head with the Torah, and you don't win people that way. Okay, so watch this. John 4, 19 and 20. Here we have him speaking to the Samaritan woman at the well. And of course, this Samaritan woman is very righteous. And if you don't realize that, I'll talk to you later if you want to know why. But she says, I know you're a prophet. Our fathers worshiped here in this mountain, but you say it's in Jerusalem as a place where to worship. All right, well, guess what? The Samaritan woman, she knew the Messiah was coming. She worships God. Yeah, her doctrine's screwed up, but what church doesn't have screwed up doctrine? Okay? But she loved God. She worshiped God. She knew the Messiah was coming. Okay, now let's look at Acts 8:25. It says, and they, when they had testified and preached the word of the Lord, they returned to Jerusalem. And then it says, they preached the gospel in many villages of the Samaritans. God always wanted them to go to the Samaritans, but not until they were trained and filled with the Spirit. Okay, I'm going to be wrapping it up with this. Most of you know this who've been here for a while. But how many of you know I can show you a verse in your Bible where the Apostle John was kicked out of the church? Is anyone who didn't know the Apostle John got kicked out of the church? I'm going to give you the verse where the Apostle John was kicked out of the church. Not only him, but every Jew was kicked out of the church. Okay. And even any Gentile who wanted the Jews to stay, they were also kicked out of the church. Can you imagine? Who wouldn't want the Apostle John in their church? Well, it's in every Bible. It's always overlooked. But what happens after the temple was destroyed, they were still meeting in the synagogues, not in churches, and they were being scattered, and the non-Jews who are getting saved are entering the synagogues, as was the big battle in Acts, and now, after a while, they think they got the Bible understood when they've never studied the Torah at all. Their only moral basis is Aristotle and Plato. And so here, let's see. Do you remember how Yeshua told his disciples not to have a Greek mindset and lord over the flock, always wanting to have the preeminence? Do you remember that? Here it is in Mark 10, 42 through 44. Jesus called them to him, and he said to them, you know that they which are accounted to rule over Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and their great ones exercise authority on them. But so shall it not be among you, but whoever will be great among you will be your servant. Whoever of you will be the chiefest has to be the servant of all. Right? Okay. Here we have this guy named Diotrephes, which means lover of Zeus. He is not a Jew. You can tell by his name. Like if I told you my name was Paco, I'm not from Russia. And if I told you my name was Igor, I'm not from China. Okay? Diotrephes is not a Jewish name. It means lover of Zeus. He is one that wants to have authority and preeminence over the flock. So let's look at 3 John. Here it is in 3 John chapter 1. There's only one chapter, verse 9 and 10. He says, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to have the preeminence, does not receive us. Right there. When he says us, he's speaking about the Jewish people. He does not receive us. Therefore, he says, if I come, I will call to mind his deeds, which he does, prating against us with malicious words. So not only does he not receive us, he slanders us with all these malicious words. And the us is the Jewish people, the apostles in particular. Then it says, and not content with that, he himself does not receive the brethren, which means he does not receive the other Jews. And then it says, he forbids those who wish to. So he forbids those Gentiles who wish to receive them, the other Jews. And it says he kicks them out of the church. It's right there in 3 John 1, 9 and 10. Here a leader has taken over the synagogue, not the church, and he's kicking all the Jews out, speaking slanderous, lashon hara, against them, kicks out any Gentile who would want the Jewish people in. Isn't that amazing how quickly anti-Semitism took over? Okay, I'm going to close with just a couple quick pictures. How many of you ever heard of Copernicus? He lived from 1473 to 1543. So he was around during the time of Martin Luther. He was around in the time of the Crusades. Okay, he was a Polish astronomer. His name was Nicholas. All right? And he never liked the earth-based theory, thinking the entire universe rotated around the earth. He said, no, it rotated around the sun. And guess what? The Catholic Church leaders condemned him. They wanted to kill him, and they killed many teachers and astronomers who thought that way. They had a total, even in 1568, they had an earth center theology with all of the planets revolving around the earth. And you would be insane to think that. We know now. But back then, that's what the church taught, and they were some of the leaders in science and astronomy. And they literally killed a lot of people who thought that it was the universe revolved around the sun. Okay, well, the problem with much of Christianity, they think everything revolves around the church. It doesn't. Just like an earth-centric theory that everything revolves around them. It's like the church is at the center of the theological universe. That's what's in all of Christianity. But it's not. Jerusalem is at the theological center and Israel of the universe, and we're grafted into that. But your perspective is going to be different if you're looking at it from a Greek Christian church mindset. That's why we have to look at it from a Hebraic Jewish mindset. Now, who wants to be deceived when the Antichrist comes? If you're looking at an Antichrist from a church Greek perspective, you're going to miss it. I'm not saying the Jews are going to get it, but I'm saying that believers have to look at the Antichrist from the Hebraic mindset. How many of you know that 2 witnesses come and they preach for 42 months, right? And then it says at the 5th trumpet, the locusts ascend, and then they are killed, and they lay on the streets for 3.5 days. And then there's another 3.5 years, and that is when the Antichrist and the false prophet are going to rule, right? So who comes first? The two witnesses. And the two witnesses are Jews. I believe it's going to be Enoch. I don't mean Enoch. I mean Elijah and Moses, representing the law and the prophets. And that's who appeared at the Transfiguration, which is what's going to happen at the last days at the Feast of Tabernacles. But anyway, think about this. What is the church going to think if these two witnesses appear and they are Jews in Jerusalem telling everyone to return to the Torah? And what are they doing? They're stopping rain for 3.5 years. They're turning water to blood. Fire comes out of their mouth and they kill people. All the Christians are going to think that's got to be the Antichrist and the false prophet. They're destroying everything. They're not lovers. And then when the Antichrist and the false prophet appear, these slick willy preachers saying it's all love, just love everybody. They're going to think that's got to be Jesus and, the prophet that killed those two bad guys. The deception, I'm telling you, is going to be so strong because we're looking at it through a wrong perspective. This is why we have to look at it through this lens. Does that make sense? Okay, for the next several weeks, I'm going to be going over replacement theology because the last thing I want is anyone to be deceived.